lobbyists who are there to represent associations, trade groups, who they're there to represent the interests of their members. Are the lobbyists for the Iowa State Bar Association representing the interests of the Bar Association and its members, or are they representing the public interest?
You know, the lobbyists for the Bar Association are representing the interests of the Bar Association. That is for sure. But we believe that it's also representative of the interests of the citizens of the state of Iowa.
I had a question about the chairman of each of these commissions, who's a judge. Is there an inherent conflict of interest there that needs to be handled with lawyers having to appear before these judges in matters, and also being a part of a commission that the judge is the chairman of?
Good question. I don't think so. I mean, that's not been my experience, and I've been involved in 10 selections, so I don't. But I mean, Judge Gamble was our senior judge, and I mean, Ryan was on the commission for a short period of time, and some of the others were too. But you know, the chief, Judge Gamble, basically sat there and let us do our thing. I mean, he didn't run the show, so I don't think so. I've never heard anybody do that. I've heard people say that Justice Wiggins runs the show at the State Judicial Nomination Commission. I've heard that in some of the arguments up at the Capitol. And again, if Justice Wiggins has been running the show on the State Judicial Nomination Commission, he hasn't done a very good job the last 3 times, because the candidates and the justices are all pretty conservative Republicans.
I think there is some concern with having one of the justices on the commission. You know, they have a lot of influence over the lawyers and even the non-lawyers because of their position. It's you know, they're more than first among equals when they get into a room with these other folks. And so I have some concerns about that. And it's also odd to me that they might have a role in picking who their colleagues are. And so that, again, is a bit of I don't know if I would say conflict of interest, but it's a lot of power to influence the direction of your own court. And so it's something that has troubled me. Now, you know, the very first state that adopted one of these plans, Missouri, did it that way. And so a lot of the states that copied Missouri have emulated it. So it's not unheard of around the country to have commissions with one of the justices on it. But there are plenty of other states that do not do that. And I think it just, even if there hasn't been any problems, there's potential for problems with the influence and also the self-interest in selecting your colleagues.
May I just respond to one more thing about that? I'll just tell you that when you read the materials from back in the 50s, when they set this up, Judge Uhlenhop and some of the others looked at it, whether or not to have a senior judge on the commissions, and they thought that a senior judge brings something to the table. They certainly know about the nature of the job. They certainly know what it's going to take to be a judge. And they certainly want somebody that's going to be collaborative with them. Somebody that's going to be not going to be a troublemaker in their in the group of judges in that particular district or county. So the people that started this legislation back in the 50s all thought that it was very important. And I again say to you, what's changed? What's changed?
Thank you both for being here tonight. So one of the elements of the legislation we have before us in the Iowa House is that it removes the requirement that the one half of the commissioners that are selected by the governor be, at least on the state nominating commission, be confirmed by the Senate. And that to me seems like one of the biggest changes, in that it allows one person complete discretion about one half of the commissioners sitting on that commission. So I guess I'd be interested in both of your opinions on whether or not, and I guess Professor Fitzgerald, whether or not in your state, how you feel about just removing any requirement for confirmation, and then also from Mr. Levin. Thank you.
So, I don't have strong views on whether the governor should get the governor's spots, the legislators should get the legislator spots, or they should have to work together for some or all the spots. I think that reasonable people can probably disagree on what the best process is for the public officials that are putting their spots together. I do think it is important, though, for there to be some place in your system for a check on the governor. I think it would be a bad idea to let the governor pick people for the courts, forget the commission, but for the courts, without another branch of government having some check on that. Because when the governors are good, you know, no one cares, but when the governors are bad, they can put cronies and all kinds of people on the bench. And so some check from the other branch of the government is important. And whether that check comes from checking the governor's commissioners, or whether that check comes from the legislature having enough of its own commissioners that the governor's commissioners can't overwhelm them, I think you do need to keep both of those political branches involved just to stop cronyism. And that was what the founding generation thought about the federal system. They debated at length whether to have the Senate confirm the president's nominees, and they decided yes, because otherwise the president could put cronies on there. And so I think some check is needed.
Thank you.
Cronyism is something that Bars is anxious about too. You know, you could get a bad governor that would appoint bad people to the commissions, and under the proposed legislation right now, the governor would pick half of the commissioners, half of the ones would be lawyers, but they would be picking, the governor would be picking half of them, and then the legislative leaders would be appointing the others. You know, it's easy to stack the deck for a particular position that the governor or who's ever in control at that time to try to do. That's what we're so afraid of. So whether it's the Republicans doing it or the Democrats doing it, we don't want either party doing that. That's where the lawyers are looking at it. We don't want anybody stacking the deck so that we get bad judges that have a political agenda out there. We just want impartial judges, judges that are going to be like baseball umpires, call them like they see it, and not with regard to whether they like that team or that team. It's they call it like they see it, and that's what we're mostly interested in. That we fear that this legislation is going to cause havoc with that, whether the Republicans are in control or the Democrats. You know, if you think about it, the way the legislation is proposed right now, at the end of the day, Democrats or Republicans will have control of 75% of the commissioners, 75% of all the commissioners. That's a lot, but I will also tell you right now, the Republicans have control of 67%. And so that's where the other thing, I can't quite figure out why they would want to nuke our old system, because you know there's always risk that when the Dems come in, they start taking over control and they have 75% of the picks. They're not going to be wanting to change this back. You know, they're going to be in control then. So we look at it, the Bar Association looks at it and says, wait a minute, this is politicizing our system. This has got danger, jeopardy in it for the way our judicial system works. And so that's why we are saying, leave the system alone. It ain't broke.
Thank you. A two-part question for Professor Fitzgerald. What methodology did you use to determine that the courts are, as you put it, to the left of the Iowa public? And do you think that the requirement for a retention vote is a safety valve if that indeed is the case?
So those are great questions. So the method in the study was this. In each state, I looked at the percentage of votes the public gave to Democratic or Republican candidates for the state legislature over the 20-year time period, and the percentage of votes they gave to D's and R's in the U.S. House races over that 20-year period in each state. That was the baseline for each state. And then I looked at the appellate judges in each state, what percentage of them had given more money to Democrats, what percentage of them had given more money to Republicans, and compared the two. And so I did that for every state, and that created a metric on how different or similar the judges were to the public in each state. A similar method was used by Bonica and Sin when they replicated my results in their study. They didn't use the public as their baseline. They used the public officials as their baseline to compare to the judges. But the results were very similar. The retention election, I think, has some good things about it and some bad things about it. So, on the good side, I know you have some famous counterexamples here, but everywhere else, it's really hard to lose a retention election. 99.5% of the time, judges are retained because there's no opponent, so the public doesn't have anyone to vote for. They're not sure who might replace the judge if they vote him off because there's no opponent. And so judges win overwhelmingly. So the good thing about that is that gives judges a fair amount of independence. And I think judicial independence is important. And how you retain your judges drives how much independence they have. So I think it gives them a lot of independence because it's hard to lose them. On the other hand, I think that it puts the judges in a bad position because they don't know if someone is going to start a campaign to get them off until perhaps the last minute. When you have an opponent, they have to declare by a certain date. And so you know whether you need to raise money and go out and campaign. With the retention elections, an interest group could come in the last 3 weeks. We've seen that in some states, and dump a bunch of money. And you are flat-footed and don't have time to raise the money to respond. And so I think it puts the judges in a really difficult spot when things like that happen. And so I think it's probably not an ideal form of accountability for those reasons. I mean, you guys have a constitution you've got to live within. So unless you're going to change the constitution, I think you're stuck with your retention elections. But I really like a method of the federal system where the executive nominates, the legislature confirms, and then maybe not life tenure, but maybe after 10 years or a long period of time, the judge has to go back and get renominated and reconfirmed. That, I think, would get campaign contributions out of it. It wouldn't have this flat-footed problem, but would still provide some measure of accountability on the back end.
One more question.
Professor, I was just wondering, the premise for your studies, I thought I heard you say earlier, the legal profession in and of itself is a bit left of center.
Yes.
So I guess, how do you, what I gather is it's failing that judges who have to be lawyers prior to being judges, but it's a failing that they are also left of center.
I wouldn't say it's a failing.
Well, I guess you're drawing from a population, sorry.
Yes.
I guess I'm looking for you to explain a little bit more on
Okay.
why this is a detachment from, or why this represents a detachment from the general population.
So this I think is a very good question. So the lawyer population is left-leaning compared to the general public. Frankly, if you do not account for that when you're picking your judges, you're just going to replicate the lawyer population in your judges. The judges will be left-leaning if you just randomly were to pick judges from your lawyer population. They would be just as left-leaning as the lawyers. So the methods that provide for no screening of the lawyer population in terms of their viewpoints end up with judiciaries to the left of the public. And so it's not just the merit system that produces the leftward skew, but my study and the Bonica and Sin study show that nonpartisan elections do too. Because if the voters have no idea what your viewpoints are, because you take party affiliation off the ballot, you just end up recreating the lawyer population in your judges. So the methods that screen are the ones where you get the judges with viewpoints closer to the public, because you're picking of the lawyer population, you can be more discriminating about which ones you're picking. So political appointment, like the federal system, and partisan elections are the ones where the judges' views and values are most reflective of the public's views and values, because there is some screening of the left-leaning lawyer pool. If there's no screening, you're just going to recreate it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, hope so, sorry.
Well, let me just say this. If lawyers on these commissions are the problem, if they're the problem, and they're causing this left skewing, why does the governor keep appointing lawyers to the commission as appointed members? I mean, Ryan was one of them. The governor appoints lawyer commissioners all the time. If they're the problem, why does the governors do that? It's because they know that the lawyer commissioners know what they're doing. They have a special talent, they have special knowledge about this.
If I could just say one thing about that, the problem is not there's lawyers, the problem is who picks the lawyers. If a left-leaning group picks the lawyers, then those lawyers are going to be different than, say, the governor lawyers, the lawyers the governor would pick. So there's plenty of conservative lawyers. There's a lot more liberal lawyers. So if you let the liberal lawyer population as a whole pick the lawyers, they're going to pick different lawyers than the governor might pick, depending on what political party the governor's from. So the problem is not the lawyers, it's who picks the lawyers. I think the spots should be open to be picked by a broader group of people, not just one little group that we know predictably is left-leaning. And I think the data shows year in and year out, the spots that the lawyers elect are majority Democrat, and I think your own data supports that, Tom.
Well, all I can say to you is that the commissions are controlled by the Republicans, not by the Democrats, and not by the lawyers, not by the left-leaning lawyers, if that's the case. That's not the data that exists in the state of Iowa right now.